Someone took a video, the LPL English Twitter account did, that shows what an average day for a pro is like. And whereas if you're an LCS pro, let's say it starts at, like, off the top of my head, I don't have the thread open now, but let's say their day starts at, I don't know, 1 p.m. and ends at, like, let's say like 11 p.m. or whatever, you know. So let's say it was like a 10-hour day or 11-hour day or something. The LPL version was like, theirs was essentially like 12 hours of like real practice and other stuff built in. And, you know, they could end at like 4 a.m. or something ridiculous. And then the idea was like, if you looked into it, it's kind of like the old LCK ones back in the day where you look into it and you're like, how are they actually sleeping and doing these things? But you just realize that's just life if you're over there, right? It's all they do is play the game, basically. So that's one. And then the other one is that, kind of in line with this, actually, LCK themselves, this is fucking rich and amazing. They want to get a bunch of veterans back. They don't necessarily just want rookies. It turns out just being, they even said, like, just essentially being mechanically good isn't good enough. And they're actually potentially going to ask some retired pros to come back because they need like captains and sort of like leadership figures. So let's start with the practice one, because this is a classic one that's been talked about a lot. But I have to say, one of the reasons why I don't find this as interesting on a lot of other talk shows when they do this one is I've noticed all Westerners come at it from the perspective of like their ideal practice environment, and they always want it to be like a fucking, almost like some politician speech, like, oh, and we will be sustainable and we will not allow people to burn out and we will appreciate their mental health. And listen, it all sounds great. That's why I say it's like a politician speech. It sounds brilliant, but the problem I've noticed is no one's really ever come up with a solution at the end that lets you then say, and in doing so I could still beat the LCK and the LPL. So at the moment, to me, the tough part about this discussion is you can talk all you want about the bad aspects, but if they are better, it's got to in some way be connected to the fact they practice the game a lot more, right? Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. Like, so the basic issue we have, like, is this. I mean, you just talked about it, right? The continuous talk about holistic approaches to the game, where we continuously go through cycles of like, hey, we should structure practice a bit differently. We should do this and that in order to make it more habitable for everyone and everything, so everyone can participate, everyone can compete, everyone can get to a certain level. But the reality is, you know, and I think that's what you just like kind of talked about already, is that working hard goes a long way, and working harder than everyone else goes an even longer way. And we've seen these examples in the LPL. We've seen these examples in the LCK. We've seen these examples also over the years in EU and NA. The teams that worked the hardest in most cases actually were the winning teams. It wasn't the ones that were the most holistic, that were the most, let's say, sports psychology oriented. It was the ones that just pushed through the fatigue, the anger that you accumulate over the course of a year, and just push through. And that's what it is about, you know. And I think that's what people don't understand when it comes to these discussions. There's a certain baseline you have to reach. If you go below that and you call that holistic, that's not holistic. You're just underworking, and you basically will underperform because of it.
What do you think, Wicked?
So I think the problem is also people come at this angle of, oh, it's not healthy, they shouldn't do it, they don't want to do it. But there's a lot of people that do it, and they want to do it, right? Like an easy example would be to look at Tyler1 and XQC. If you look at XQC, he streamed for 4 years, 10 plus hours every single day on average, which means every single time he took a day break or something else, maybe his internet was down, that means he needed to make up for that time other days. So he probably streamed like 11 hours on average, right? The days he actually streamed. And he always looks somewhat unhealthy, right? He's not like fit or anything. But then you take Tyler1, who does a similar thing, streams all the time. He's extremely fit, he's looking good, and he's taking care of himself. So it is possible to do both. The problem is just you have to put in the hours. You have to put in that much practice because somebody else is going to do it if you don't do it. And at the end of the day, being the best in the world is not about being balanced. It's just about being the best. And that's the only thing that matters to them.
Yeah, I find there's so many angles you can go with on this topic, but like I say, to me at the moment, it always gets caught on that angle, like I say, that people are trying to make it. Well, the best way I can describe it is like this. As someone who in my own job, I've done the periods where you grind ridiculously. Like I had one period where I did like a Thorin's Thoughts video. Notice I didn't just say a video, like a Thorin's Thoughts video every day for something mental, like 90 plus days in a row. And I can tell you it is really hard. Like obviously there's the days where you don't feel like it, or you're ill, or something happens in the day that means you can't get on the internet. Like if you make yourself do it, it is brutal. Like you will feel at the end like sort of mega exhausted. But I have to say the problem is this: when I then later like optimized my, in this case, like work instead of practice, I almost feel like I had to sort of brute force and do it the wrong way to know what to take from that to then do it more efficiently, you know. I don't think actually I could have sat down at the beginning and thought, well, I want to do loads of videos, so what's like the most perfectly efficient, like holistic method? I don't think I would have been able to do it. I think I almost had to like make the mistakes or learn the basics of doing it, just essentially just iterating the basic thing you currently do to then figure out how to do the whole like work smarter, etc. So I think part of the problem I have with this as well is I agree with the initial premise. If you could get done in 4 hours what takes the other guy 8 hours, yeah, it would obviously make more sense for everyone. The problem I've noticed is no one really has the solution of what that is, though. No one's really figured out. Like for example, I don't think that if I go and watch the LPL and LCK teams, they're not doing the most efficient practice, but they're definitely not just banging their head against the wall. They're not just doing the same thing for 8 hours in a row. So I almost think it's actually a little bit kind of almost arrogant to assume that you can figure out how to do in less time what they're doing, because I actually think some of the teams don't really understand what those squads are doing. I mean, basically it ties into a discussion we had a few episodes back where you were talking amazing about how they changed the NA scrim blocks, where I think, isn't it like they do a best of 5 now or something like that, whereas before it was like 3 blocks or something?
I mean, they do one best of 3 usually, or they do, actually that's what it is. In EU, partially we did best of 5s, but they basically reduce it from like 8-10 games to basically 5 to 6 games, and most people actually cancel after 4 or 5. So
right,
it's a definite reduction, yeah.
But they are basically, as far as I know, yeah, by that, doing like an entire extra block in the Asian regions. And that's without, obviously, it goes out saying, they can add in as much individual solo queue as they want. In fact, some of the stories back in the day, I have to say, were horrifying. Like, I've even told some of my friends who are Western pros, like, it might sound cool in an interview. I remember one of the ones that was really egregious was when Matter in season 4 did an interview, and he said, like, I practice all the time, but then when I go to bed, I see Heartsaw was still on his computer playing like for 3x. It was just like, what? And he was even saying, like, when he calculated it, basically there was no way that guy could have been getting like 8 hours sleep. So that's another thing, actually. That's one other tangent I would add in. Another reason, in my opinion, you wouldn't actually want to, as a Westerner, do this kind of practice schedule if you can avoid it, is I've seen the people in Western sports, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, people like that, who did like the absurd amount of practice. And I can tell you, it's not at all, by the way, that they like wreck their health, because they understand their health is key to actually performing. What they do basically is what they give up is their personal life. They'll just tell you straight up, yeah, I just gave up having certain friends. I don't go to the party or the nightclub or whatever. I just go to the gym, I go home, and that's it. Basically, like, I think that's an area that people are really underestimating. A lot of Western pros, you can't tell them, like, yeah, by the way, just don't ever watch anime again. Yeah, no, stop watching sports. Like, just the game's all it is. But they don't get it. That is what, like, not all the Asian players, but the really elite ones are doing that. Like, I remember there was a story in StarCraft that one of the really great players called Fantasy, who played for Boxer's team, he once had an interview, right, where unironically, he wasn't trying to be cool by saying this. He said in the interview, effectively, I don't really have hobbies, I just play StarCraft. And they were like, what do you mean? And he was like, well, yeah, like, I don't watch TV shows, I don't watch, you know, if I've got spare time, I just watch more games. Or, you know, I get someone to help me do a different type of practice. Like, I totally do not expect anyone to do that. But the problem is, if that's what the person who's winning does, you have to somehow acknowledge there's something to it, even if we don't know what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the arrogance part is really important. Like, when we think about like the traditional, like how we actually became better at the game, for example, even years past, like it was due to like that increased amount of workload, right? I remember in season 4, for example, obviously with TSM, we had a like 14-hour day when we were in Korea, 14 hours, like legitimately, like we scrimmed 8 hours, and then we had solo queue on top of it. That's an insane schedule. It made us really good. And if we think about every other year that came afterwards, like people that were at the top in the West even were just the hardest workers. They kept doing what they had to do, but they also got, like, I guess the exchange for that, which is basically like more monetary resource, more influence in the scene, whatever it is, depending on the situation, right? For example, with TSM, obviously you had more exposure. In other teams, you probably got more salary, right? Like, in a turn, at least when that's given, when you have like that kind of like compensation for it, I think a lot of people are willing to put in the work. But right now, and I think that may actually the biggest issue is that there's like little to no incentive for a lot of the people to actually work that hard, because they don't see quite like the impact their work has on the team. Or what I want to say is that like it is relatively undirected when they work harder than everyone else. It doesn't result in anything, because a lot of the players are just like stuck in teams where they potentially couldn't even reach anything because they didn't have from the very get-go, like a winning mindset in the team that was built into.
Do you think the whole team has to do like the practice, or like as you're saying, if one person does it, you think it just doesn't have that big an effect?
I mean, it could have. In some cases, it may have, but in a lot of cases, I just don't think it does. And I think it's more about like basically playing for your career and just being like, hey, I'm going to work harder than anyone else and I'm going to get a better contract than anyone else next year, and that's what I'm going to end up. So because a lot of these teams are not built in the way that they used to be built, right? I don't want to say in our area, but I guess it was in our era. It was that teams that were performing well, they got to go to Worlds, they got to go to events, they got to do stuff. And that was basically like our kind of like gift, that we got before working hard. But nowadays, what's the incentive for like the people on SK, for example, to work harder than anyone else? Like the only incentive is that you're like, hey man, I'm gonna get a good contract next year. I'm gonna be out of here. Fuck everyone else. That's basically the thought process that I think is happening right now. So it is not like how it is in the Korean culture and Chinese culture, where it's about listening to elders and kind of like the greater like I don't want to say good, but I guess the greater kind of like team aspect that is always in the forefront, because that's ingrained in the culture. It's relatively individualistic, which is fine given how the organizations are operating. I think that's where the key issue is lying, where I think if you're really good in Korea, if you're really good in China, it seems to me that you get like compensated a lot more fairly for what you're doing than if you're doing it here. Like I think in terms of like how you're seen within the team, how you're seen within the scene, I think when it comes to the Western scene, especially in Europe, I think on an individual scale, the only thing you're getting out of it is maybe next year they're going to get a better contract, but it's not the same in how it is in Korea and China, where you instantly get that recognition. You're going to be signed by your team again for next year, and you're going to continuously like improve on the team's atmosphere too.
Go on, Wicked.
I think one problem I have the whole thing is that Western people don't get recognized when they put in the effort as well, because there's plenty of Western people that do it, right? When we went to Korea, for example, all we did was literally eat, sleep, and play. We played 14 to 15 hours a day, every single one besides Tabs. We complained about Tabs playing 10 to 11 hours a day. We were like, you should play more, And that was 10 to 11 hours. Like, you should be playing more games. And it wasn't really a problem. He played well and everything. Sadly, we lost, but that's what it is, right? But I know there's plenty of players that put in the time. Forgiven used to put in the time as well when he was playing. I know that 100%. He even played all the way till like 5 in the morning often after scrim blocks, and then waking up early to play again. Then there was scrim blocks for them, right? So there's so many Western players that are putting in the time, but everyone thinks it's only an Asian thing, and it's not really. It's just, I think it's an individual thing. Maybe there's more Asians that do it, but in general, like there's a lot of Westerns that do the same thing.
Yeah, I will say, by the way, that always was the ultimate example to me of how differently the scene works in the West, because obviously we're based on things like people like your personality, or they think you're a cool guy. It's not, as you say, based on necessarily how good. Because the ultimate example, I mean, you were in the team amazing, was that Copenhagen Wolves squad. If people don't know, right, the main thing that used to piss Forgiven off was that Forgiven was tryharding like a motherfucker because he's just got into the LEC. It's his first chance to actually be like good, basically. Meanwhile, Youngbok, who at the time was actually pretty popular because he was always really good in interviews and seems like a cool guy, doesn't he? Well, he was the top laner. I mean, I think Forgiven told me he was stuck in fucking Diamond or something like that in solo queue, and like just obviously wasn't putting in the hours. And so to Forgiven, it actually felt like you get fucked for that, because it's like you get more annoyed because you're putting in loads of effort individually, but a teammate's sort of like bottlenecking how good the team can be. But because he's a cool guy, he in some ways almost gets rewarded for not doing the practice, and you look like the asshole because it's making you getting mad. So that's an extreme version. A lot of teams obviously aren't like that. But what I want to ask basically is, is it as simple as this? Because obviously on an individual basis as a team, like if I was like Cloud9, for example, and I want to avoid this problem, I don't have to level the whole scene up. I could, for example, make this like a really big quality of how I recruit. Like I don't just recruit because you're a good player. I recruit because, look, we're going to go really hard next year. We're going to do like loads of boot camps and extra hours. So I'm getting people that I know of like a good track record of work. Like Wicked says, they actually enjoy it. Like that's another, I think that is a really underestimated element, by the way. It's one thing to sort of bully someone and tell them you've got to do it this much because, the fucking LPL teams do it. If you're someone like Froggen, where you actually, as for real, in the off season would just do it for fun, like you would just do 10-hour streaming sessions just for the off season, no one's even telling you to. A player like that's way more likely to be able to do it, obviously, because they sort of like playing the game that much anyway. What I was going to ask you is this though: would that actually work? Like, do you think players? Do even players who like it like that eventually burn out? Do they go in and out with waves? Can people stick with it for years? What do you think?
I mean, obviously people don't necessarily burn out, right? Like the perfect example is XQC with streaming. He does 11 hours every single day for 4 years straight. And it's every single day I've looked at the stats, right? So, I mean, and he still does it. People don't necessarily burn out. It's just certain people do and certain people don't. And that's definitely something you could recruit based on.
No, I think the burnout aspect is overblown. I think there is some truth to it, obviously. But I do feel like that the burnout that I've experienced and I've seen on the scene is more or less like a dissonance between like how the work you put in, the results you get. Like, and somebody like when that doesn't match up anymore, it's somebody like, fuck it, I don't want to work as hard anymore, and that's when that happens.
So more like psychological burnout.
Yeah, it's a psychological burnout because you don't get what you want. So, but what I feel like what we have done is like that we have inverted the scene. That's what you just talked about, right? We have inverted the scene. We're like, back in the days, we rewarded, or we talked about like people that were like really good individually, that were really pushing hard, pushing their teammates forward. They kind of had this like they kind of had the state in the scene. They were like regarded as, I don't know, like really high, really highly. Like Forgiven was one of them. Frog was one of them. I mean, partially, I was one of them for some time. Bjergsen, like that kind of work ethic, that kind of almost insanity that you bring to the scene for that very short period of time, it was regarded as like something to admire, right? Nowadays, though, like when people are kind of like implementing that kind of work ethic and really trying to push forward, they're seen as the odd one out because like the whole team is structured not in a way that is like, I would say, result friendly or esports friendly. It's more or less like HR friendly, if that's the best comparison I can come up with. Like it's more
like brand in that sense, yeah.
Yeah, it's like if I think about how HR would run esports organizations, I would like. I can see a lot of the similarities between normal companies and esports companies at this point. I don't entirely buy into it. I think there's a necessity for having some kind of sports psychology on hand, like to basically like, or psychology on hand to kind of like mingle and talk to the person about. But even that is not something that is too necessary depending on the situation, right? Like, what I think a lot of people have to just go back towards and really understand is that like, pushing the team forward and really trying as hard as possible and working as hard as possible should be the goal of every single player. That should be the goal. You should want to win the most. You should want to do the most in order to win. It shouldn't be that you're the most friendly teammate, you're the most healthy-looking guy out there to a certain extent. But that's what we've made it up. We've made that a goal to a certain extent because we've continuously killed off people that were kind of like bounding on on insanity, like between genius and insanity. They were pushing those boundaries forward and forward. And at some point they were weeded out and phased out because, the scene didn't like them anymore. They spit it out because we started running like a lot of the organizations as if they were HR departments. You know, I think that's the biggest issue that I can see. You should really structure from the other way around. You should be like, hey, this is the goal we want to achieve. And then we're going to try to make that as holistically as possible. The goal shouldn't be make the process as holistically as possible and as good as possible. Make sure that the goal that we try to achieve is achieved in the best way possible. That should be the goal. And I think that's lost in a lot of ways.
One thing actually I want to ask you about Wicked is, from times in your career when you've played a lot, do you actually agree with him on the burnout topic? Because I have to say, as I said, in my own work, I've actually had times where I've worked a lot. And I actually do feel like the idea of like raw physical burnout, you know, the idea like your body's breaking down, I do feel like that almost feels like I won't say it's a myth, but it's a bit overblown. Like, I feel like it's almost more like the gym. It's like the more you go, the more you can do, you know, like your body adapts to it and it doesn't become that big a deal after a while, you know. It'll seem like it if you did it the first week, just like the gym. If you went and did your full workout on week 1, you'll feel fucking wrecked, obviously. But, you know, if you could do the same workout for 10 weeks in a row, it'll just be normal eventually.
So, I mean, back in the day, we used to stream literally 10 hours every single day while practicing, right? Me, Ocelot. We even had a time where we were streaming because we wanted to boost the viewership. So one streamed 12 hours, then the other one started, then streamed 12 hours, right?
Right.
We did that continuously because then one had night schedule, one had day schedule because you could just keep going, right? And back then there wasn't hosting features. You just told everyone, yo, everyone go to that stream next. You know?
Right.
We just did that.
Manual raid, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. So like the thing is, I don't really believe in the burnout. I have never experienced it myself. The thing I've experienced is more so, oh, there's a new game coming out. Oh, if I try that game, then maybe I get distracted and I want to play that game more. If I don't try the game, it's no problem. I can just keep grinding League, right? So it just depends if there's any distractions with things I'd rather do. And it's not so much that, oh, I don't want to play League. I feel like I'm burned out. I feel exhausted. So I think it's personality based. Like, I have never experienced it. I played a lot. I used to play 10 hours every single day for like a year or two, maybe even more. And I had no problems with it, like absolutely none.
Did you ever feel like, I mean, you said you didn't feel any kind of burnout. Like what I'm trying to imagine is like if it has to do more with the changing surroundings than anything. Like because for me when I was playing, like I thought every team that I was on, like as soon as I was on and it kind of had these established rhythms, I didn't like that once that was gone, like all the stress in the world was gone. Like I was actually fine at that point. But as soon as I had to re-implement like some of those rhythms, both changing teammates, changing surroundings, changing my living conditions, I think that's when the burnout hit for me. Like that's when I was like, dude, this is fucking annoying. I don't want to go through this again, because that's a stress that I encountered. Did you ever feel that way, or?
No, I didn't feel that way. The only thing I felt is, as I said earlier, if I start playing other games, then I can't just want to play that game instead of League, right? But I also think it's something you build up. If you build up to stream 10 hours a day, then streaming 10 hours a day is not that exhausting. But if you take a break and then you're like, oh, I have to stream 10 hours, oh, it's really long. So it takes like a little bit of time to build up to it. But once you're there, I never felt a burnout if I just kept going.
Okay.
I will also say as well, like the one last thing I have on this topic is, like I alluded to, as it's, even though it sounds great to say we're going to work smarter, not harder, or whatever the fuck the catchy line people says, the question is, like, what have you invented that no one else has figured out? Because I have to say, I actually haven't. That's one thing in League I've been a little bit underwhelmed by. I haven't heard many stories of people having like genius, you know, like unorthodox training techniques and stuff. Like there were some in other games. Like for example, I know they have the practice tool, but a lot of people don't even seem to use that. Like in StarCraft, for example, they would actually make things like if you're using the air units, for example, like the Zerg air unit, like the fucking whatever, they had a map that was just that, and you could just practice it over and over again. And all you did is that one interaction instead of like playing an actual match every time, you know. Like I've always felt like League in general, by the fact that people practice in solo queue, etc. Like practice is by default inefficient in League, unfortunately. We don't really have techniques that they have in sports where, you know, you isolate one thing and do it over and over again and can do it. So you'd have to, like, I don't think it's impossible, but you'd have to be something of a genius, I think, to come up with any solutions to these. Like, I feel like a lot of people have tried and they haven't come up with many good ones. Like, I haven't heard many good ones, put that way.
I mean, the main problem is just the practice tool sucks, right? You don't have any opportunities. You should be able to do 5v5 practice tools if you want to practice team fights. You could just go in and boom, team fight over and over and over again at certain levels, certain whatever.
Yes.
But currently, we just have a practice tool that's completely useless. Like, oh, go check your damage on a dummy. Good job. And that's all you get, you know. That's all Riot have given to the teams. So I actually think if Riot wants players to be healthier, Riot needs to get a practice tool out that's worth it, because they are by definition making it almost impossible to be a healthy individual and practice to be the best.
I mean, but that's also not in their interest, is it? Like they actually care more about, I mean, they don't really care about you being like in the game, I guess, and you playing it. They just care about someone playing it. I think that's how we have to see it. Like, I don't think it's in their best interest to keep the players healthy. I think it's keep the players as addicted as possible, having them jump in as many solo games as possible, making sure that they are basically brand ambassadors in the game to a certain extent. Like, I think that's how I see it.
I think it is important the bigger esport grows, right? Because the thing is, if they start coming around stories with, oh, I can't practice efficiently because of Riot Games or blah, 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 and all the blame goes towards them, that's going to look extremely bad for them if a lot of pro players are unhealthy and gets injured and they complain about it, right? So it is in their best interest because how much they care about esports, but otherwise I would agree with you.
I mean, I would say they should, but it's like, if the broadcast was disconnected and basically like the entire product was disconnected from Riot Games, I think then like it's a bit easy. It would be a bit easier for them to care about it. But what I mean by that is like basically because everything is connected to a certain extent, and they run the broadcast, they run the game, they do both like at the same time. They don't really have to care as much about like who they're portraying, who they basically marketing up to be someone that is like basically a hero to them for the broadcast, whatever it is. Like they just care about someone being there. I think, but that's maybe just my opinion. But what I want to talk about, like, is like it's not just a practice tool, but it's also like obviously the overall innovation when it comes to practice is usually happening within practice itself. So it's not like, I mean, because we have so little amount of tools, the only diversity in terms of approaches is happening basically in reviews and it's happening in game. And I think that's where a lot of people don't quite know about the behind the scenes innovations that are happening because they seem so minuscule, but in the grand scheme of things, they're actually pretty big. And I remember, like, obviously, to begin with, how we led reviews, like in season 2, whatever it is, we basically didn't have reviews. We basically had like 5 minutes, whatever it is. We talked about the game a bit. Hey, we should have done this, we should have done that, whatever it is. Okay, well, then we had the replay system. Then we had like basic coaches implementing their strategies, whatever it is. So it became more complex, but it's more about like individually driven. And it was more like certain things were shortened in a way that everyone understood it faster. So we developed terms for the game, like shifting whatever it is to like rotating whatever it is. And then at some point like that snowball, obviously at some point. So we basically have more terms to basically describe easier situations. And that's basically what I think the innovation has been about so far.
Wait, you guys didn't watch replay back in the day?
I mean, season 2, I don't think I did.
Oh, we had replays in season 1. We watched replays all the time. But I was just confused by that. But,
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.